I have one very, major request to both of you is keep on worrying about Pakistan. don't desert us. We need people like you.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today I'm here with Babar Saab and my friend Atif. हम समर में आए हुए थे तो हमने सोचा ये अच्छा मौका है. Every time we come, we try and meet Babar Saab and try to get slightly wiser after a conversation with him. So today I thought we'd have a good chance to have a general conversation with Babar Saab. We have some questions. I know you have questions as well.
I'm very happy that we have this opportunity to spend more time with you people.
I think we're the luckier ones in that deal, but thank you, Babar Saab. So maybe we'll just jump straight in, Babar Saab.
Sure, absolutely.
Babar Saab, let me start again. Shukriya bahut कि आप हमारे साथ आए. Pakistan right now, as you know, is perhaps in the worst time since its inception, certainly from an economic point of view. One can quote the numbers, but perhaps the most important judgment is coming from the young people of Pakistan who are not seeing a future in Pakistan. And as you are well aware, since you run businesses in Pakistan as well, one of the toughest jobs as a business person is retaining talent. Talent is globally mobile now, and young people are wanting to leave Pakistan because they haven't seen the country come together in a way that was perhaps hoped for in the beginning. Aap, mashallah, just celebrated your 98th birthday. You were a young man when Pakistan came into being. So I wanted to start off by asking you the question about the beginning of Pakistan. What were the hopes and aspirations? And if you can tell us what, in your mind, what was perhaps some of the key events or personalities that changed Pakistan's trajectories, what could have been, starting from the early days of Pakistan?
But I tell you, if you were to, I was 21 at the time of partition. Lekin I started taking interest in the politics in India from almost the time the Pakistan resolution was passed in 1940. So those 7 years, of which 6 years I was in Pakistan, and the 7th year I was in America in 1947 in partition. So there was a kind of a upsurge among the Muslims that they wanted a home of their own. If you can go back in history, after the 1937 election, the we were all Indians at that time, they had provincial legislatures in all the provinces of India. And what happened between 1947 and 1937 and 1940, 4 years, there was the provinces in which the Congress was in power, they had discriminated very much against the Muslims. For instance, in UP, you had Bombay province, there was Congress party, and in South India. So Mr. Jinnah, celebrated, in 1940, the Congress boycotted the British government and said, we don't want to support the war effort. And later on, it converted into Quit India movement. So these provinces, these assemblies were dissolved. Except in Punjab, we had the Unionist Party, which was very supportive of the British. So there was this general upsurge that if the British were to leave India, and the majority rule would be with the non-Muslims, with the Hindus, we would not get our due share. Mr. Jinnah's contention was that we don't want more than 25%. We are 25% is our population, and this is what we want. And the Congress contention was everything should be on merit. There should be no quota system. So that was one way of having their own say. So with this, there was a general kind of relief for when partition did take place. And the other thing was that there was a very strong propaganda by the Congress before partition that Pakistan economically is not viable and they will collapse within a few months of independence and they'll come back with folded hands that take us back. So 1948 was when I came back, and I was in Karachi because the family was, though we come from Lahore, but we were based in Karachi. Business center was in Karachi, so we started our business in Karachi primarily in export and import. So the challenge to the government of Pakistan and to the business community and primarily to the bureaucracy was, we've got to make this country go.
So there was a sense of we
tremendous
want
sense
a new
of
beginning.
patriotism.
We want to build something.
Yeah, challenge. Because, and I tell you, the first government that we have, Mr. Jinnah, and followed by, Mr. Liaquat Ali was the Prime Minister, and Mr. Jinnah unfortunately died in 1948. But till the martial law was declared in 1958, 10 years the ministers were there, but they relied very much on the advice of the bureaucrats. And the bureaucrats were very, I would say, very patriotic, competent, because most of the good Muslim bureaucrats from India moved here, and they were mostly non-Punjabis. They're from the UP, from...
So, Babar Sahib, just because I'm very interested, because obviously none of us are aware of what was happening in the first 10 years. Us sense mein you were living through that first 10 years.
How
would you, if you take the last 10 years, for example, of Pakistan, and the attitude of the bureaucracy, the government and so on, and you compare that with the first 10 years, how are they different? Are they things
totally
that
the
come
reverse.
out?
In fact, 2 weeks ago I was invited by the Administrative Staff College to talk to senior bureaucrats who were there, going through a program where they were to be sort of promoted to 21 and 22 grade. And they asked me this question. I said, you are partly responsible for the mess we are today, because how many of you have ever turned around to your minister and said, this is not feasible, or this is not the correct thing to do? In those days, the bureaucrats were, and the ministers listened because they were talking in the interest of Pakistan. It was not any selfish interest. It was what is in the interest of the country. And I don't know much about East Pakistan, but apparently things in East Pakistan were equally good, except that you see much of the economic activity was in West Pakistan. And there was a general sense of deprivation by the people in East Pakistan that all the economic activity was taking place in East Pakistan. They were earning foreign exchange through export of jute, which was the primary foreign exchange earner at that time. So there was a general kind of an imbalance between the two countries' sentiment. But there was no pro-Indian movement in East Pakistan at that time.
Babar Sahib, jo Atif ne pucha ke pehle 10 saal, that's an interesting contrast, an interesting snapshot, since you've experienced both the first and the current 10. When does this switch happen? Aapne ka bilkul reverse ho gaya.
Ayub Khan ka jo martial law hua.
So is that a critical turning point for you?
That was the start of the rot.
Can you tell us a bit more about this rot?
वो ये था कि
And were you aware, or were you getting aware of the rot seeping in when the shift was happening?
I mean, was
मतलब ये बड़ी बज़ाहिर rot था कि ये आहिस्ता-आहिस्ता एक disease शुरू हुई है.
The martial law itself, I mean, the word was very frightening. I remember the day the martial law took place, almost all banks in Karachi were foreign banks. So one bank manager called me and said, "What do you think?" I said, "I dare not think." So that was the kind of impression. And it was a very kind of, they wanted to establish their authority. They said, any foreign exchange that you have to declare it Otherwise, I don't know whether it was capital punishment or not, but people would go to jail, and everything was, there to assert their authority. And though Sikandar Mirza, who was the president at that time, thought that it would be a kind of a benevolent thing, but within 2 weeks they got rid of Sikandar Mirza because the army said that we are doing all the work, why should he take any credit? So they got rid of him.
But ये inevitable था Babar Sahab, this transition that you're talking about. We wonder as we discuss, and आपने तो experience किया history के, क्या हमारी history इसी तरह play होनी थी कि were there junctures that we missed, were there opportunities we missed?
You see what happened as soon as Ayub Khan took over, the business community completely sort of collapsed. And I remember being called by the finance minister at that time, and he said, along with some of the other people from the so-called 22 families, okay, get on and do some business because you people have to get the economy moving. So, but gradually, you see, Ayub Khan himself was not corrupt, but the people around him wanted to please him.
That sounds like connections being used for some sort of expropriation.
Yeah, and then it went from bad to worse. Then other people started sort of taking advantage of putting their own people forward. Lekin I can tell you in the first 10 years when there was, half the ministers were from East Pakistan, and there was no sort of feathering their own family beds at all. There was a very interesting, you may have read in the early history of Pakistan, that when Britain decided to devalue the pound, it was called the sterling area. All the dominions were in the sterling area, and the pound was devalued from $2.8 to the pound to $4 to the pound. All the dominions devalued except for Pakistan. Fazlur Rahman, who was the Minister of Commerce, he insisted that we don't devalue because we need to industrialize Pakistan, and we will have foreign exchange, so we want to make it sure that we are able to buy our machinery cheaper than others. So India then all of a sudden refused to trade with us. So there was overnight trading was stopped. Previously everything that Pakistan was needing in the first 13 months, the devaluation took place in October 48. So was coming from India, उन्होंने कहा कि we don't recognize your pound, so we won't sell anything to you, nor will we buy anything from you. So then
हमारी overvalued exchange rate की बड़ी लंबी history है. So Atif has written about this and talked about this, which is, if anything, ये argument कि हमें overvalue रखना चाहिए is much more an argument for consumers.
ठीक है.
But if we're overvalued, we're not export attractive to the world.
At that time, the idea was, the intention was to industrialize, to bring in machinery at a cheaper price so that people could afford. The industrialists could afford it.
So that argument real? Atif, you talked about this. Does it make sense at that stage of our development कि हम overvalued रहते उस वक्त? In hindsight, if you were to reevaluate this decision.
But particularly, there's a huge relative price wedge that kicks in if everybody else is effectively devaluing and you are not.
You're suddenly far more expensive than everyone else.
So
Pakistan suddenly became more expensive than everyone else in the world in terms of selling its stuff.
So whatever you can do with the machinery, ultimately, if the goal is to export, then you have priced yourself out of the market.
We had cotton. There was international demand for cotton at that time. Japan needed cotton. And Eastern Europe was a big buyer of cotton at that time. See what was happening in Eastern Europe. The entire trade was now controlled from Moscow. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, all these countries that were sort of bordering Russia and under their influence were. So Russia was exporting things from there to Pakistan as Russian goods, and importing goods were needed by those countries It was all going through. They had these corporations called all union corporation. They're trading companies in Moscow. So that was had in 1952. The Russians held a economic conference of countries that were trading with Russia, and I was invited to that conference. It was very interesting during Stalin's time, and so it was very interesting to see how the Russians were controlling the whole of Eastern Europe. As America was in 1947, I saw at the United Nations how they were controlling the whole of South America.
So, हम पाकिस्तान किधर आ रहा था? हमारी strategy से क्या थी? We saw these two powers. Who are we trying to sell to, or were we even trying to sell to anyone?
And who were the key people who were sort of making decisions
in
Pakistan at the time? And why were they different? Why? I mean, you mentioned that the first 10 years, people were not as much after self-interest and they were more after collective interest.
लेकिन उस वक्त ये था कि America, you see, was the richest country, so people were, government, the foreign office and the cabinet was very keen how to get close to the Americans. And usme they played as kind of a smart move that our ambassador in UK talked to the Russian ambassador whether they would invite Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan to Moscow. तो वॉशिंगटन से भी इन्विटेशन नहीं आया, जैसे मॉस्को से आया उसके बाद वॉशिंगटन से आया. So we forgot the Russians and we went to Washington. So the idea was to get very close to the Americans because of the World Bank and IMF and all that kind of thing.
But was there discussion on the right economic model? मतलब उस वक्त दो competing model थे.
नहीं. Later on, when Mahbubul Haq came into the planning commission and there was a group from Harvard that came and sat in the planning commission and drew up the first 5-year plan.
That's right.
So usme, that was the plan that was based on it. And then a very interesting initiative was taken by Mr. Ghulam Farooq, who was from the frontier, but he stayed on in India after partition because he was a very senior officer in the Indian Railways. And he was hoping that he'd become the head of the Indian Railways, so he didn't migrate here. So when the Indians decided not to have him, then Mr. Ghulam Muhammad, who was the finance minister, who knew Farooq quite well, then persuaded him to come over. And Farooq then suggested to the government that the private sector neither has the ability nor the capital to put up industry. So we should set up these PIDCs, Pakistan Industrial Development Corporation, one in East Pakistan and one in West Pakistan. Government will set it up, and he said he will find the right kind of technocrats in India of Muslim origin who would come and run these, and then we will disinvest and give it to the private sector. And this is what he did.
Was he right in that view?
Yeah, I think so, because that was how they started, the board mill in Nowshera and the Karnafuli paper mill and the paper mill in Khulna and the fertilizer plant in Daud Khel. All these were put up by government, and government had resources. You see, the Korean War was a boon to Pakistan. We had a lot of foreign exchange accumulated. So I remember one day, I was a young kid at that time, but Shoaib was talking to my brother कि हमारे पास बहुत foreign exchange है तो क्या करें इसका? And I stupidly said, आप gold खरीद लो. So he poo-pooed the whole idea.
Rightfully so.
And but we then surrendered a lot of foreign exchange.
In what way?
I don't know how, but if you dig it up, you'll find out that we could not spend the foreign exchange that we had.
So, Baba, इसने कहा जब state ने अपनी enterprise शुरू की, a lot of countries try to do this sort of state-led industrialization. उसमें danger ये होता है कि state पर crowd out कर जाता है, state की इतनी presence हो जाती है कि private sector suffocate हो जाता है. So the question जो आपने handover कहा, क्या वो हुआ?
हुआ, बिल्कुल हुआ. कर्नाफुली हुआ, ये दाऊद खेल में हुआ. fertilizer में there was no buyers. People didn't have that skill or that capital. फिर हमारा banking system भी it started from zero. The National Bank of Pakistan was set up by people coming from Hyderabad.
So Babar Sahib, they were good-meaning people early on.
That's it.
Why was there not a push, or maybe there was, so maybe you can talk about that, a push to put a constitution in place, for example, a very fundamental structure, ताकि political evolution जो है वो पाकिस्तान की that has some direction. I mean, the constitution in Pakistan comes in very late, right? Which is an obvious thing, you start in a country, you start with the constitution. So can you say something about that?
I'll tell you a very interesting incident. We were living, my brothers, Wajid Ali and Amjad Ali were fairly prominent in the business and political circles in Karachi because they knew everybody who came from Delhi. And my elder brother, eldest was Amjad Ali, but Wajid was based in Bombay. And my father knew Mr. Jinnah quite well because he used him as his legal advisor. So Wajid got to know Mr. Jinnah, quite as well as anybody could. So just to give you an instance, I was visiting him during my holidays from Asian College. So when he came, Jinnah Sahib se milna hai. I said, that'd be wonderful. So he called up his secretary and he said, bring him. So I went to see, he took me to meet Mr. Jinnah and he invited us for lunch the next day. So, give you the background that Bhai Wajid and everybody knew that he knew Mr. Jinnah well. So one evening, Chaudhry Zafrullah, who was then the foreign minister, came in. And, he could take a lot of liberties with my brothers because he knew them from. So, in his Punjabi, he said, Jinnah Sahib di na hondi muth da tu baal lega. Jinnah Sahib, he was clean shaved.
Only in Punjabi can you so beautifully excoriate someone, yes.
Please tell him to have the constitution in his lifetime.
This is Zafrullah Sahib saying,
telling my brother to go and convey to Qaid that he must make sure that we have a constitution in his lifetime.
So clearly there was a recognition
need and there was recognition.
So what stopped it?
He was a sick man.
No, I understand Jinnah Sahib, but
the rest of the
hopefully there are others around.
Liaquat Ali again had too little time, within a year or so he was bumped off.
But is there just passiveness or is there an active fear of putting a constitution in place? But the susti hai ke
nobody could think that far forward. They were living from day to day.
No, but Babar Sahib, Zafrullah Khan obviously thought about it.
He
had an important position, he was a foreign minister and so on. So clearly someone in the cabinet is thinking about this as the most important question. Why wasn't there greater urgency around it? Or perhaps others were trying to prevent that? Because that seems to be like a very important...
But another way of reframing this, हम political economy सोचते हैं कि हर चीज़ की कोई active resistance थी इसके against? Was there a set of people who didn't want this?
But I'll tell you what happened was, during 48, 49, 50, the main problem of Pakistan was Kashmir at that time. India had occupied Kashmir, and so that was, I'll give you an example. I was very friendly with one of the second secretaries of the American embassy. His name was Redford. He used to come out of the house quite often, and whenever he came, everybody was pouncing on him कि ये Kashmir का हमारा सवाल करवा दो. So after a year later, he was transferred to Kabul. He wrote to me, he said, I wonder what Pakistan would do if there was no Kashmir problem. So that was the number one item on the agenda. The government's total attention was Kashmir. And Zafrullah Khan, as you know, was involved in the fight at the United Nations where he was representing Pakistan case about India sort of grabbing Kashmir, unlawfully and all that.
So that weighed heavy, you're saying, on everyone. And that continued for a decade,
Till
over a decade,
today.
or
I mean, even
or
today. Huh? 70 years. So their constitution was, I think it was picked up by Bhutto. Then when they had started nationalizing, then, there was very good bureaucrats in the government at that time, people like Awan and Alauddin Ahmed and Waqar Ahmed. So इन्होंने कहा कि then the best thing to run these nationalized industries is to get people who are managing international companies like Burma Shell, ICI. तो भुट्टो ने उस फाइल पे लिखा, you get Babar Ali to come to the fertilizer to join the public sector. So this is how I was drafted in. So I got a call from Islamabad. They said, we want you as chairman of the fertilizer corporation. मैंने कहा कि शायद, I said, how many days a week do I have to spend? उन्होंने कहा, no, this is a whole-time job. So I said, wait a minute, I'll come over. So मैं गया फिर, I knew Waqar quite well, and the minister, J. Rahim tha, he was one of the people who drew up the constitution of the PPP, and Mubashir Hassan. तो इन्होंने कहा कि you better not say no, otherwise packages को nationalize कर देगा.
ये अभी अयूब एरा की बात हो रही है.
No. This is
Bhutto.
when Bhutto took over.
अच्छा.
So this is how I went to the fertilizer. But I must say, for 4 years I was there, I never got a single telephone call कि इसको रखो, इससे खरीदो.
Do you think that move was damaging for an industrial evolution? Or
I mean, yes. You see,
Nationalization
was because during Bhutto's time, nobody dared sort of interfere. So once he was gone, then it was a playground for all the politicians.
For patronage and all that.
Patronage, इसे खरीदो, उससे खरीदो, उसको नौकर रखो, उसको ये करो.
Babar Sahib, since you were also, obviously, your family was in the private sector as well, what damage did nationalization play on the private sector in terms of the expectations of the confidence of the private sector?
It did.
About investing in
for
Pakistan.
A short while it did. I mean, I'll tell you, I went to Washington soon after I came back into the private sector in 1979, and I was keen to introduce this long life milk, which Tetra Pak में pack करके you put it there and you can use it for weeks without refrigeration. That's a process that had been patented by the Swedes, and that was the Swedish company which helped us set up packages. So I knew them very well. So I went to IFC at that time for financial aid. I mean, for funding foreign exchange. Muin Qureshi was there. And he looked at me, he said, you are the only Pakistani who has come to me for putting up industry in Pakistan. मेरे पास यहाँ लाइन लगी हुई है पाकिस्तानियों को, कहता मुझे ब्राज़ील में लगवा दो, मुझे ये लगा दो. तो मैंने कहा नहीं, मोइन Pakistan is my home and I'm going to bat to the last ball. So can go, all right, if that is your thing, I will support your this thing. So that was about a couple of years. There was a lot of exodus from here. The Dowds went and bought an oil company in Houston, in Texas.
This is in the Bhutto era ki baat
in the Bhutto era.
This is
then
but that's a major, it sounds like a major shock.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than private sector investing in
Here,
Pakistan, it has started to de-invest and it's investing outside of Pakistan.
And people like ये family थी, they originally were not Cheniotis, but they were from Chakwal. I forget the name now. They had set up this Pakistan National Oil Company, and he then set up a base in Augusta, in Georgia, and he lived there and he died there.
This seems important, something Asim and I have been discussing about the question of domestic productivity and why there is a lack of investment. As you know, even till today, one thing that stands Pakistan apart from other countries is the very low level of domestic investment. Or we talked about sort of, productive young people, they're more of an exodus than they want to stay in Pakistan. Is that a critical moment, 70s mein, the nationalization move, that breaks the spirit of private enterprise in Pakistan, at least large businesses, large private sector?
In fact, uski bhi jab ab jawab de rahe hai, not to situate in that moment, we talked about hamari economic development. Let's situate Atif's question in just private sector की development, entrepreneurship, innovation. कहाँ से हमारी हिस्ट्री शुरू हुई? जो आपने होप था पहले 10 साल में कि प्राइवेट सेक्टर में भी उसी तरह की होप थी, उसी तरह की ख्वाब थे उनके, कि ख्वाहिशें थी कि हम ये कर सकते हैं. And how does that evolve over time to where we are now?
In the beginning, you see, there were very few people who had either the ability or the interest to put up industry. Everybody was in trade. Trading was easiest. You know, no risk in it.
खरीदें और बेचें.
हाँ. तो industry में we were interested to set up industry, and luckily, you see, many of the companies that migrated from India, like the tobacco company, because they had a market here and they knew the environment, they knew the customer, their brands were also known. Lever Brothers, Pakistan Tobacco Company, Glaxo. So they needed packaging. So I got to know them. We are today importing our packaging, why don't you put up a packaging company? So I went to Sweden to the people who were selling packaging here. I said, instead of selling packaging from Sweden, why don't you come and put it up in Pakistan? And because it was family owned, they took 5 minutes to decide. They said it's a good idea because we want to replace our present equipment with new equipment.
This is the rousing.
Rousing.
ठीक है.
We'll send our present equipment to America. My family will not like second-hand equipment. They said, why are you worried? We'll send the people to manage that. So they sent 22 people to this company where we are sitting to set up this company. This is how packages, and I came into business.
And does that continue? So जो हमें समझ नहीं आ रही कि एक natural transition होती है. A lot of countries do this. You set up with import substitution. You set up buying and selling. You attract outside expertise. But वो एक temporary situation होती है. उसके बाद आप बदलते जाते हैं, and then you start producing yourself. You start innovating yourself.
यहाँ tragedy ये हुई कि there are a lot of people who came and linked up with Pakistanis. लेकिन you know, their attitude was कि ये गोरे से हमने सीख लिया, अब इसको निकालो किसी तरह. So Daud Harkali saw that, you know, Ahmad Daud got rid of them. And they did, you know.
सीखा कि नहीं सीखा? Question तो ये है कि सीखा कि नहीं? जो आप कह रहे हैं सीख लेंगे गोरे से.
पूरा चढ़ना नहीं सीखते. उन्होंने उसे दरख्त पे चढ़ना नहीं सिखाया ना.
सिर्फ गोडी करना सिखाया.
So this was, so our attitude was you treat your partner the way you want him to treat you. So we had no problem at all. At one time we had about 20 joint ventures, and the ones that are not there anymore was they decided to leave Pakistan, not decided to leave us. It was very friendly sort of goodbye.
But जो आतिफ का सवाल था कि अगर आप ये हिस्ट्री देखें, आपने तो माशाल्लाह मेंटेन रखा. Are there critical moments के इसकी trajectory negative पे चलेगी? Like was Bhutto a critical moment? या उससे पहले भी critical moments आए हैं?
Critical नहीं, I think it was Ayub Khan के ज़माने में there was नहीं उसमें you know people were given opportunity who took advantage of bank loans and things like that, but it didn't interfere with us because we played with a straight bat, so it didn't bother us. I mean, they never bothered us. तो लेकिन वो आए, they were short-lived. फायदा उठाया, खा पी के
ठीक
बैंकों के पैसे खा गए.
This is during Ayub even.
During Ayub, and later on also, much later on.
ठीक.
I mean, give you an example. I'm jumping forward many years. During Moin Qureshi's time, you know, he got me to work with him. So after, and when I was looking after finance, I realized that, you know, about 2,800 crores of rupees was owned by politicians to the banks, nationalized banks. So after a few weeks or months, I went to India and met Dr. Manmohan Singh. So I told him, I said, my experience here is that 2,800 crore रुपया हमारे politicians ने खाया. Can I, do you think it is any different here? Here it is 28,000 crores in India. He said it's the same thing.
So India, people often talk about Manmohan and that era in India is a turning point for India in a positive way.
उसने फिर deregulate किया ना. That's what happened. And here also one must give credit to Mahbubul Haq that he deregulated. Here, you know, in the 80s you were not allowed to import a computer. It was banned. Fax machines were banned.
But Babar Sahib, Pakistan did go through that liberalization wave during the early 90s that I think you're referring to. Lekin Pakistan ki macro trajectory still did not change, unlike India, which obviously a consistency of policy thi, but there were perhaps other factors as well. इसी तरह से अगर आप उससे पहले कुछ अर्सा चले जाएं, you mentioned nationalization and so on, but if you look at the 80s, there are countries like Korea, East Asia in general, which start to grow massively through this export-oriented policies. Either of those transitions, China of course next door, Pakistan missed all these transitions of countries in the neighborhood adopting different strategies. Why do you think, even though there was some dynamic private sector that could have sort of latched on to these global trends, why do you think that did not happen in Pakistan?
Because the overall leadership of the country was, they could only think of themselves and nobody else. They were not thinking of the country at all. For instance, ये जो highway वगैरह शुरू किए थे, the whole idea was really to pad the cost of that so that they could pocket money.
So I want to come to leadership. Atif, we've discussed leadership. So उस पे भी आते हैं. Before we leave this kind of pasture of conversation, you know, it's interesting. Sometimes I wonder, are we not greedy enough? And let me explain what I mean by that. So when you think of enterprise or industrialization, a lot of countries go through highly corrupt phases and they grow out of it. The slight difference seems to be unke ambitions global hote hain. And if you have global ambitions, dekhen agar aapke sirf ambition Pakistan mein sabse bada X ya Y hona hai, you have access to a political economy you can exploit. You can always succeed. You can either succeed by truly creating a product, which is amazing, or you can succeed by making sure no one else has a chance to compete with you.
ठीक है.
जब आप global market में आते हैं, वो second avenue खत्म हो जाता है.
ठीक है.
Because very few people will have that global political power. So आपका सिर्फ एक strategy रह जाती है, produce something that the world wants.
ठीक है.
And if you succeed in that, then the market is massive. फिर आपकी growth. अभी Pakistan doesn't have a single unicorn.
No.
$1 billion kind of company.
Because you see, there was the emphasis was not on improving your productivity. The emphasis was earning money and pushing out the surplus elsewhere. And the surplus is just put in the banks there because they didn't want to be, didn't want to be known that they have something. India ne ye kiya, for instance, give you an example, a company like Mahindra and Mahindra, you heard about that.
Exactly.
Mahindra have, they excelled in making the Jeeps first and then everything else. They have an investment of $1 billion in the United States.
Of course.
And they are proud of it, and India is proud of it. Japan, but they're telling me that their ये जो है उनका current account is deficit, but they make it up through dividends of investments abroad.
You could put it in a nice way or a bad way. In a bad way, why aren't we greedy enough? In a nice way, हमारे ख्वाब इतने छोटे क्यों हैं? Why are we not dreaming of world?
You're not allowed to invest abroad.
So you think it's policy which restricts us from thinking on the global scale?
We got permission.
Politics में तो बाबर साहब हमारी constant global game चल रही होती है कि हम अब ये करेंगे और अमेरिका की वॉर में हम कोल्ड वॉर में ये करेंगे. We have a massively global view of the world in politics.
Nothing to do with business. Khadim, we'll send our soldiers, we'll send our ammunition, but not allow people to invest abroad. अब आप देखें ना, take systems for instance, almost 90% of their income is in foreign exchange. They are not allowed to invest abroad.
Systems, by the way, just so everybody knows, Systems is the leading IT firm in Pakistan, set up by Babar Sahab and Ijaz Khwaja.
और उनका अगर ये हाल है तो फिर जो बेचारा छोटा entrepreneur है.
Their own foreign exchange, they are not allowed to buy.
डर किस चीज़ का?
We have a lot of opportunity of buying small companies.
What are we afraid of as a nation if that happens?
Jealousy.
I know आपने वो पिछले अपने इंटरव्यू में जुगनू साहब ने कहा था कि a secret to your long life is कि आपने हसद नहीं कभी किसी से किया.
हमने नहीं, लेकिन you see there is a general sort of State Bank के जो laws and rules हैं, you're not allowed to have anything abroad.
So अगर आप किसी को global citizen बनने नहीं देंगे तो फिर business भी आपकी.
I mean, 12 billion rupees have invested in Middle East in property, and that's all,
right.
under the table.
Recent report जो आई थी, right? Exactly. Gabe Zuckman की.
So there's no productive investment abroad where income is coming back into the country other than your remittances, or wo bhi people are sending back to feed their parents.
I mean, this is one Rona that Atif and I as economists have, which is, I wish our country was obsessed with productivity.
Yeah.
With just being the best you can in whatever you're doing in a way that you can compete in the world. And just if you had that mindset is also, uski ek to hope badi aati hai.
Let me just say, I just want to, this is an important point. We are obsessed with things like you mentioned, real estate.
Yeah.
Property ले लें, उसका rent लगा लें,
ठीक है.
बच्चों की जिंदगी बन जाएगी. But we are not thinking in terms of
we being, you're not saying us.
नहीं,
we are
हमारे
against
पास
that.
तो पैसा नहीं है, it doesn't even matter what we think. I'm talking about people who have the resources. कि जिसके पास भी कुछ पैसा आता है, the mentality is to put it in some unproductive thing like real estate. It's not to set up a new business, a venture that might compete globally, that might bring much more money in the long run through dividends and so on.
That's what I mean by being greedy enough. कि अगर आप लंबी सोचें, बड़ी सोचें.
Like these other countries, they have developed their own brands. So it shows up in this other manner as well. कि Pakistan does not have global brands. Korea built LG, Daewoo and all that, Hyundai and so on. China, of course, built many brands.
कर रहा था, खाड़ी कोशिश कर रही थी.
So Pakistani brands are not.
Bundu Khan has gone to
खाने में शायद चले जाए हम.
No, but even खाने में भी, let me push back on that. Even खाने में भी, it's not like we are becoming whatever the Hardys of the world or whatever.
हमारी कोई massive chain कोई नहीं है.
Massive chain नहीं है, So that's a bit of a puzzle. Even though the people are dynamic. दुनिया में हमारे लोग फैले हुए हैं.
Your leadership doesn't have that imagination.
I think leadership पे बाबर साहब से पूछें फिर.
Yeah. Let's turn to the leadership question. If it's leadership that matters, so where is it? Why do we not have it?
But they're only thinking of themselves.
बाबा साहब वो कहाँ से लीडर लाए हम? या शुरू में थे वो चले गए वो थे उनके बच्चे क्यों नहीं वो लीडर बने?
Or let me flip it around. Are there individuals who you think had that potential? किसी वजह से they were blocked or whatever. But did you see people who had that leadership potential?
One or two, but what really surprised me that they were willing to work under a very corrupt leader. They didn't have the courage to say that I'm not going to work for you because you have different value system. वो नहीं है यहाँ.
How do we change the value system?
You have to go back to the schools. तालीम आपकी सही होनी चाहिए.
इस पे भी आते हैं बाबा साहब ये आप कई दुखड़े हमारे आप रिमाइंड कर रहे हैं हम सारों को collectively क्या चीजें हैं जो नहीं चल रही जो चल सकती थी.
It all starts at the primary and probably more at the secondary school, not even at the high school. You've got to give them the value of being truthful. झूठ ना बोलो. अब देखें अब कुरान शरीफ में बार है पूरा तोलो.
Right.
I mean that means be fair to everybody.
मदियन की पूरी कौम तबाह हो गई थी तोलने की वजह से.
I give you a very interesting story. This was told to me before partition by Mia Anwar Ali. He ended up as IG police. When he was SP here, he was sent to Scotland Yard for training. So after 2 or 3 months, the training period khatam ho gayi, so the fellow who was overseeing his training, he called him up and he said, young man, is there anything that you wanted to know and I haven't told you? What do you do about adulteration of milk? Can milk be adulterated? It starts there, you see, that you think that by cheating somebody, you can get away with it. And that's something that has to be driven into your blood at the age of 10. You can't do it later.
There's a bit of an irony here.
काफी सारी irony है.
Because we pretend to be like very pious, very, religion is everywhere. But what you're saying is that the values are, so where did we lose our way?
Munafqat. We think we can get away with compromising on your conscience.
वो कहाँ से आया? Where, again, शुरू में you didn't see it in the beginning.
Because people did not tolerate dissent. I mean, one of the reasons why our company has done better is our managers come and say, we don't agree with you and we can accept. I said, you convince me, I'll change my
आपकी
opinion.
ईगो नहीं फैक्ट हुई बाबा साहब, आप कहते हैं तुझे क्या पता, मैं I am the boss.
No, that never happens. You never give an order, you suggest.
You know, it's interesting. The thing I struggle with, and Atif and I disagree on some of these aspects. बंदों में मसला है कि सिस्टम में मसला है. You can say, I mean, I've done work in property tax in Pakistan where आप उन्हीं corrupt अफसरान को लेते हैं, but if you give them a situation where they can potentially earn decent wages by being non-corrupt, a lot of them switch. Not all of them.
No,
So-
I mean, it's the well-to-do person who's more corrupt than the poor man.
तो आप ख्याल है ये इकोनॉमिक नहीं, बट उसमें भी इंसेंटिव्स,
वही
इट्स नॉट
आपको,
पैसा. आई
हाँ.
गेट इट. आप ये नहीं कह रहे कि जी अमीर, ऑनेस्टी इज नॉट अ लग्जरी गुड. इट्स नॉट दैट द रिच कैन अफोर्ड टू बी ऑनेस्ट. आई गेट इट. आपने कहा कि इवन द वेरी रिच बिहेव डिसऑनेस्टली. बट यू नो व्हेन आई थिंक ऑफ इट, हर इंसान का एक सिस्टम में आप हैं और आप सोच रहे हैं कि मैं अपनी बेहतरी कैसे करूं, राइट? हर कोई बेहतरी चाह रहा है. आप अगर नीचे भी हैं और ऊपर भी हैं, यू आर ऑल ट्राइंग टू इम्प्रूव. द क्वेश्चन इज व्हाट मेक्स यू willing to choose a corrupt way to improve? Because US में भी देखें, अगर मौका मिले, it's not as if rich businessmen in the US don't take advantage of loopholes.
No.
If they can find a loophole, they'll take it. In fact, a lot of famous business leaders, in fact politicians in the US have proudly said कि मैं कितना smart हूँ कि मैंने इस loophole का फायदा उठाया.
So हमने पहले भी बात की है, but let me frame this question of self-interest, selfish interest, private interest versus collective interest. ये टेंशन तो हर जगह होती है. जैसे आपने मनमोहन सिंह की भी एग्जांपल दी, वो उन्होंने कहा कि जी इंडिया में भी तो ये सारे चीज़ें होती हैं, चाइना में भी ऐसे ही होता है. येट व्हाट आई फाइंड डिफरेंट इज़ कि एट द सेम टाइम देयर इज़ ऑल्सो एन अर्जेंसी अबाउट कलेक्टिव इंटरेस्ट. कि देयर इज़ अ level to which we'll push our private selfish interest, but at the same time let's work on protecting our collective interest, jisko aap maybe you can call it some national spirit if you like, and then they protect it. I mean, even abhi bhi aap dekh le, you know, there is this sort of trade war of sorts going on between China and the US and so on, and you can see ke both parties are trying to, while trading with each other, they are also and doing all the selfish things, making money and so on. They are at the same time trying to protect their collective interest. Same thing with Saudi Arabia. बहुत major transition आ रही है because they are trying to protect their collective interest. Even if they have to let go of the past and move to a different direction, they are doing that because they feel they need it to move away from oil. You see it in multiple instances in various places. Pakistan में you don't see that sense of what is our collective interest and how do we push for our collective interest. That seems to be missing relative to other.
It's not there. It's not there.
I mean, why हम
शुरू 10 साल में था.
पहले 10 साल में था, लेकिन अब you got to sort of start it. You've got to let people feel that वो इकबाल का है ना, बशर कायम है रब्ते मिल्लत से तन्हा कुछ नहीं, मौज है दरूने दरिया और बैरून दरिया बाहर कुछ नहीं. Well, people have to realize that there is so much to be gained by working together. Isme, the first question is, what is there for me in it?
How do we can we bring people together? Maybe Asim can. Can Asim do something to bring people together on a platform?
आम काफी सारे दे दो शायद.
Coalition के यार के ठीक है, you know, कि जिसको हम कभी अंग्रेजी में कहते हैं as a bargaining of
नहीं उनसे, I
among the
mean,
players.
you keep on hitting your head against the wall.
I guess, you know, I'm cynical about these things. Atif knows. मुझे मजाक तंजिया अंदाज में कह रहा है कि आसिम इकट्ठे करेगा.
बड़े you are very tolerant.
You know, I guess my challenge is, you know, इकट्ठे आना कि आप किसी बड़े प्रिंसिपल के लिए आए, अल्लाह करे वो हो जाए. मैं तो छोटा सा कह रहा हूँ, मैं कह रहा हूँ अपने प्राइवेट मतलब के लिए अगर थोड़ा बड़ा सोच के आ जाए. देखें, अगर किश्ती डूब रही होगी तो इवेंचुअली सारे ही डूबेंगे उसमें.
बिल्कुल.
And you know what worries me slightly is, you know, my read of your first 10 years, and I fully believe you, is कि एक तरह से उस पहले 10 साल में देखें, जब कौमें मेजर स्ट्रेस में आती हैं तो वो इकट्ठी हो जाती हैं.
ठीक है.
Do we need, I mean, it's sad for me to say this, do we need to literally experience drowning to be able to grab each other and try and survive? Do we need another pre-partition moment कि यार अंग्रेज हमारे पीछे थे, हिंदू में कुछ स्पेस नहीं दे रहे थे, हमें क्या ज़्यादा दुनिया में दुश्मन चाहिए, हमें ज़्यादा ट्रेजेडीज चाहिए? Do we need to go through a really terrible period to realize this?
It depends on your DNA. For instance, I mean, I don't want to talk about myself. I've served on several boards of companies. When I'm sitting on a board, I'm only thinking of that company and nothing else. How to take this company forward. So that attitude is missing in our political arena. There is what is there for me in it.
But कुछ भी नहीं बचेगा. मुझे तो ये है कि अगर हमें ऐसा आतिफ
but at some level
देखिए हमारे ग्रुप में ये डिप्रेस चीजें कहता है, मैं थोड़ा ऑप्टिमिज्म रखने की कोशिश करता हूँ. ये तो कहता है पहले डूब चुके हैं.
Let me try to be more optimistic. ठीक है बाबर साहब, we understand all of that. Is there something we can do to bring that realization into the power corridors of Pakistan? Because at some level that is the key question. कि यार आप अगर आप इकट्ठे national जो interest है उसको कुछ importance दें, and you stop doing the basic blunders that you are doing. I mean the flip side of that is कि हम बात करें लोगों को इकट्ठे लाने के लिए. उसकी flip side ये है कि अगर आप पाकिस्तान की trajectory देखें over the decades, and something we haven't really touched upon is कि पाकिस्तान में we have divided our own society in multiple ways. जो नफरत है, level of hate है, हमने कभी कोशिश ही नहीं की. Like I can't even remember like an important campaign that is attempt is to bring people together.
Sure.
On the other side there are on the street campaigns चल रही हैं जिसका मकसद है लोगों में नफरत फैलाना.
बिल्कुल
चाहे वो sectarian level पर है, चाहे वो ethnic level पर है, and so on. We've never actually tried to come together. I mean, this is a serious question क्योंकि जब हम collective interest की बात कर रहे हैं, we've never even. It's a very strange phenomenon actually because countries don't work like that.
Correct. I mean, give you an example. Last week I had the team that recruits people for admissions LUMS के. तो मैंने उनसे पूछा कि how many non-Muslims do we have? तो कहेंगे कि we today इस दफ़ा जो application आई उसमें 20 Hindus from Tharparkar. I said excellent. मैंने कहा कोई सिख है कि एक सिख भी है. So I mean, as far as, and that is because I grew up in an environment where there was no bias against anybody.
So I want to take us to a positive place.
ठीक है.
मैं भी डिप्रेस हो जाऊंगा फिर. सारे डिप्रेस हो जाके बैठे हुए यहाँ पे. There are success stories in Pakistan.
Sure.
Right? Let me be completely self-serving. We have a CERP team sitting over here, so I'll toot our own horn for a second, and I'll admit this is all self-serving, but I know the example of what we've been involved in well, so I can speak to that. And I think there are many others like that, but I think it's important to share it. So jab Atif aur main, when we first finished our PhDs, I remember us sitting, and हमने कोशिश की थी एक website बनाने की. हम थोड़े से अकेले feel करते थे. Mostly it was out of sheer feeling of orphanness, in an intellectual sense. कि हमारे इंडिया से दोस्त थे, हमारे ऑल मोर कम्युनिटी थे, and they had a burgeoning academic community. They had seniors they could talk to, they had mentors, and खैर हम socially वैसे भी inept हैं, so I'm sure mentors थे, but हमें कोई समझ नहीं आती थी. तो हमने एक वेबसाइट बनाई जिसमें हमने लोगों के नाम लिखना शुरू कर दिया. I remember getting in touch with Nadeem ul Haq, just give how many people are we?
ठीक है.
And first of all, it was a very sobering number, very small number. And at that time, I remember sitting there, we all thinking, why is this the case? It's not that they aren't smart people. We had a lot of classmates of ours who were very smart people. We thought it's not a talent issue. Somehow a system nahi ban raha, hum aa nahi rahe, hame academics mein incentives nahi mil rahe. A lot of people, I remember Raza Bakir was phenomenal. Raza was our senior. Raza ne us waqt Berkeley se PhD ki hui thi. We would look up to Raza. He'd published in a really amazing journal, and we would think हमारा ये academic mentor ही है. रज़ा ने बड़ा उसको academic offer थी, उसने कहा यार ये सीन नहीं चल रहा. We can talk to Raza why he decided that. Fast forward 20 years now, and so part of that, for somewhat, in fact, if you think of our trajectory, it's not that हम बड़े कोई selfless थे. We were trying to do research in Pakistan.
Sure.
We met Faisal Bari, met Ali Chima, Turab udhar tha, and CERP, the center we created, the Center of Economic Research in Pakistan, we created initially in LUMS. LUMS gave us space. Us waqt, Ishrat Hussain was a governor in the state bank. I say this all the time. I give him acknowledgement for it. Ishrat Saab ne kaha, aao. He opened up data from the state bank. Atif and I wrote our first set of. Jo aapne wo bankon ki baat ki, we have a paper which shows how much GDP we lose by lending to politically corrupt firms, politically connected firms. Actually, corrupt bhi nahi thi, sirf political connection tha. To corruption bhi nahi dekhi. It was like 1 or 2% of GDP every year, we estimated. उस वक्त who was this Securities and Exchange Commission में उस वक्त
मिर्ज़ा
खालिद मिर्ज़ा साहब थे. he gave us access to the Securities and Exchange Commission data. We wrote papers on that, looking at the exploitation of that market. कहने का मकसद ये था कि enough of us came together to create something. Now, 20 years later, there's a friend of mine, Jishnu Das, your World Bank.
I saw that 3 days ago.
He wrote a piece.
This is a center of excellence in the region.
He says in South Asia, this is one of the most academically successful Southern organizations. And, and what is even more important to me is, there's also leadership transition. We effectively have left, we are on the board of CERP, but CERP ka leader is Maroof hai. And Maroof and I were just talking earlier today about, I am thrilled that I no longer call the shots in CERP.
Sure.
I'm thrilled we have a new person who's leading it.
Absolutely.
Right? Who came from outside, who's grown CERP in ways we could never imagine, in better ways.
Sure.
So that's just one example. Aapka Lams ka example.
Yeah.
So there are instances in Pakistan when and I'm sure if we ask our audience and other people, start naming positive instances
is the
of
key
collective.
Towards the whole thing. I mean, one additional item which you have not mentioned about CERP is the number of people that you have managed to put into the international, arena, who worked as assistants and juniors.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That runs into.
And it's not just what I love is
a very large number.
There's many other organizations. Kreb kar raha hai LSE mein. There's many other organizations. Ideas, Karachi mein hai. So there are other centers coming. So for me, if you ask me, is Pakistan a research scarce or can we export research in Pakistan? The answer is absolutely yes.
Sure.
आपने सारी उम्र एक चीज़ किया, which I've been fascinated by, because I've seen since we started interacting, which is now I think been a couple of decades at least, and many people have a longer relationship with you. You've always been hungry to find talent. It's very interesting. I feel like and given your stature, I remember इसकी funny मजाक मेरे घर में ये है कि मेरे बड़े भाई जो कि सारी उम्र इंग्लैंड में रहे थे, you randomly called him once. He didn't know who you were. We obviously know who you are. And I don't know how you find his contact. आपने की देखा वो Imperial में पढ़ते थे. He's reasonably decent. And you were trying to convince him to come work. And he called my father up and he said, मुझे किसी Syed Babar Ali ने phone किया. And my father said, Gade, do you know who called you? Right? And literally that. And then we explained to him. But मैं मिसाल इसलिए दे रहा हूँ because what I find fascinating is you've dedicated your life to finding talent in Pakistan at every level. How do you view, are we a country which lacks talent?
No, there's a lot of it. You've got to have the open mind and the ability to win the confidence of woo people in the right way.
तो आपको इतनी सर्च क्यों करनी पड़ी? अगर talent हर जगह फिर रहा है.
No, but I mean, you meet people and then you size them up and you feel whoever you think has the right chemistry with you. You try and persuade that person to work with you. Just to sort of emphasize on this is, you take the national outreach program that we have at LUM.
Absolutely.
There you pick up people from the bottom of the pyramid, and you give them the opportunity to develop. And there are no holds barred as far as financial constraints are concerned. And 90% of them make it. Provided the first selection is the right one.
Yeah.
The first admission point is you bring in people who have the right kind of background to be able to digest what you're going to give them. I have one very major request to both of you is keep on worrying about Pakistan. don't desert us. We need people like you to keep on sending us ideas. Because you are sitting at a place which generates new thought. And we need it.
Ji Babar Sahab, I mean, obviously, we will always continue to do that because there is no other option.
आप बुलाते रहेंगे हम आते रहेंगे.
मैं तो खैर
only condition is mangoes.
Every day is a
आप बेशक हो या ना हो आप बुलाते जरूर रहेंगे.
You keep on hitting your against the wall in Pakistan. I mean, this place needs people like you. Don't give up.
No, that's very kind of you. But I think the message of not giving up is obviously applies to everyone.
There's a lot to be done here. There's so much opportunity for this country to go forward.
आप hopeful हैं अभी भी?
बिल्कुल. That's why I'm here every day.
Despite all the...
हाँ, जो यहाँ आप कर सकते हैं कहीं नहीं कर सकते.
So how do we, maybe we'll end on that. How do we create more Babar Alis? You know, who can how do we
there are hundreds
others?
of Babar Alis there. You need to give them opportunity. You need to recognize them.
Do you see at least 5 people who will continue your legacy?
Yes.
Yes?
You're more than 5.
We should get the names.
हाँ.
Likh lo. Because I mean that...
I keep on working and discovering new talent, and especially the younger ones. I, sort of interact with them.
I hope you recognize, Baba Sahab, talent दूसरों में देखते रहते हैं, and what we see in you is a very rare talent. And I hope you recognize, I'm sure you do, but I think it should be said. Because आपने अपने आप को हमेशा as a purveyor of talent दिखाया, but in this meta thing we're saying, that talent which you have, which you've displayed throughout your life, which attracts all of us around you, all of us sitting there are impressed by you, it's that. Right?
No,
that's a very rare talent.
It's because I've interacted with people like you.
You've turned it over
Learning from others.
We learn from you all
That's the title of your autobiography as well, by the way, learning. So that is a good...
I think Baba Sahab ne bahut time le liya.
Thank you so
very much.
Baba.
It's been a
such an
wonderful
honor.
thing.
It's always an honor to see you, and it is an honor today as well.